The air inside the great library had thickened beyond the usual weight of dust and parchment. Now it bore the acrid sting of smoke and the sharp tang of fear. The once vibrant halls, lined with scrolls and tomes from every corner of the known world, echoed with a cacophony of chaos shouts, the clash of weapons, and the frantic rustling of fleeing feet. My hands trembled as I pressed palm to parchment, inscribing verses born from the very heart of this crumbling sanctuary. Each word was a desperate thread, weaving a fragile tapestry against the encroaching darkness. I had sought refuge in a shadowed alcove, pressed tight against the cold stone wall. The flickering light of distant flames cast elongated, dancing shadows that seemed to mock the sanctity of this place. Around me, the library's vast collection lay in peril. The ink on countless scrolls threatened to run with the heat, the brittle papyrus ready to turn to ash. Yet I wrote, for I believed in the power of words to outlive even the fiercest blaze. Suddenly, the hurried footfalls of more than one pursuer shattered the fragile quiet. The metallic glint of swords caught the light, as a ragged band of looters, driven by desperation, and the breakdown of order stormed into the corridor. Their eyes wild, they sought not knowledge but plunder, eager to seize any treasure amid the ruin. My heart pounded, not from fear of death, but from the thought of losing what little I could still save. A voice cut through the turmoil, a fierce, commanding presence that shifted the tide. Celine burst into the alcove, breath ragged but eyes ablaze with determination. Her athletic form was a stark contrast to the scholarly quiet I embodied. Where I was fragile and contemplative, she was force incarnate. Without hesitation, she brandished her sword, stepping between me and the advancing threat. "Back!" she shouted, voice sharp as the blade she wielded. The looters faltered, momentarily stunned by the sudden defense. Celine's stance was unyielding, a shield forged from resolve and purpose. In that moment, the library's walls seemed to hold their breath, as if the very stones recognized the significance of this confrontation. The clash was swift and brutal. Shelves toppled, sending cascades of scrolls fluttering like wounded birds. The scent of burnt papyrus mingled with the coppery tang of blood as Celine parried and struck, her movements a blur of practiced precision. I could only clutch my precious scrolls tighter, the verses within now more vital than ever. Amid the melee, Celine's voice rose above the chaos, rallying a sudden surge of city guards who had rallied in defense of their heritage. Together, they pushed back the marauders, restoring a fragile semblance of order. When the dust settled, Celine extended a steadying hand, her eyes locked onto mine. "We must move quickly," she urged, voice low but urgent. "There is still much to save." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. With Celine's strength bolstering my resolve, I rose to my feet. The scrolls, delicate and precious, were now entrusted not only to my hands, but to the fierce protection of a warrior who understood that knowledge and survival were intertwined. As we slipped deeper into the labyrinth of fire and shadow, the alliance between us crystallized a union of intellect and action, poetry and steel. I knew then that the preservation of memory required more than verses. It demanded courage, defiance, and an unbreakable shield against the flames of destruction. The flames outside roared like a beast untamed, but within me a different fire burned, a fierce hope that the words I penned, guarded by Celine's unwavering shield, might endure beyond the ruin. In this crucible of loss and resistance, I found my purpose anew, to be the voice of a library dying, and the herald of a legacy that would rise from ashes yet to come. As we moved forward, the shadows lengthened, and the fire's hunger grew. But so too did my determination, fueled by Celine's fierce protection and the unyielding power of the written word. Together, we would face the night, guarding the fragile ember of knowledge against the consuming dark. And thus, amid the ruin and roar, the poet and the warrior became one, each a vital thread in the tapestry of resistance woven beneath the ever-watchful gaze of the burning library. The air was thick with smoke, a choking veil that blurred the once majestic outlines of the great library. Its walls, which had held the accumulated wisdom of centuries, now groaned beneath the relentless assault of fire. I sat on a cracked stone bench, my hands trembling as the acrid scent of burnt parchment clung to my skin and filled my lungs. Around me, the ruin whispered of knowledge lost, voices silenced beneath the weight of flame. I dared not close my eyes, for in the flickering shadows cast by the dying embers, I saw the faces of those who had walked these halls before me, the scholars, the scribes, the seekers of truth. Their dreams, their painstaking labors, now consumed in a blaze that seemed to mock the fragile endurance of words. Yet, in the depths of my despair, a stubborn ember glowed within me. The verses I had penned, hastily scrawled on secret scrolls hidden from the inferno, took shape in my mind. Each line a defiance, a testament that though the flesh of books might perish, the spirit of their meaning could endure. The fire might claim the scrolls and tomes, but never the essence of the thoughts they carried. Callimachus approached, his steps slow and measured, the weight of years visible in the stoop of his frame and the tremor in his voice. His once sharp eyes, framed by round spectacles, gazed upon the ruin with a sorrow that was almost sacred, the library. He breathed, all that we devoted our lives to, reduced to ashes. Yet, these flames cannot consume what dwells in memory and in the hearts of those who bear witness. His words were a balm, a fragile hope amid the desolation. I looked to him and saw not defeat, but the quiet resolve of one who understood that loss was not the end, but a crucible through which true knowledge passes. Celine stood nearby, her athletic silhouette a stark contrast to the crumbling backdrop. Her dark eyes burned with an unyielding fire, mirroring the flames that threatened to devour us all. She was a guardian, not just of the city's walls, but of its soul. Without a word, her presence was a promise, a vow that whatever remained, whatever could be saved, would not be surrendered lightly. I unfurled a fresh scroll, the parchment whispering beneath my fingers. The ink was still wet as I wrote, each stroke a lifeline thrown into the abyss of loss. My verses wove together the anguish of destruction with the fragile tendrils of hope. They spoke of the impermanence of stone and paper, but also of the immortality of ideas, of stories, memories, and truths that no flame could erase. The cacophony of crackling wood and collapsing shelves was a grim chorus to my writing, yet within it, I found a rhythm that steadied my breath and sharpened my focus. The library was dying, but I was its voice in the darkness. "Why do you persist?" Callimachus asked softly, his gaze fixed on the smoke-choked sky. "Because if I do not," I replied, "then who will remember what was lost? Who will carry the flame when these ashes cool?" His nod was slow, a silent affirmation that the burden we bore was one of memory as much as survival. Outside, Celine's vigilant watch kept the encroaching chaos at bay. She moved with purpose, her resolve a shield against despair. I knew that without her, my fragile scrolls would be no more than charred remnants scattered to the wind. As the night deepened, the fire's roar softened to a mournful crackle. Exhausted, I paused my writing and let the silence seep into my bones. The weight of loss pressed upon me like a stone, yet beneath it, a flicker of something enduring hope. The hope that words, once breathed into existence, take on a life beyond the flesh of their carriers. In that moment, I understood the sacredness of my task. Not merely to record what was being destroyed, but to transmute grief into defiance, loss into legacy. The library's physical form would not endure, but its spirit, carried on by those who dared to remember and speak, might yet kindle a fire that no destruction could quench. I dipped my quill into the ink once more, the scratch of its tip on parchment a solemn hymn. Though the flames consume the scrolls I wrote, the fire of thought burns eternal. And with those words, I sealed my vow. The library might fall, but I would carry its light into the shadows, a beacon for those yet to come. For in the end, knowledge is not bound by walls or scrolls, it lives in the hearts of those who remember. Night surrendered slowly to dawn, the smoke thinning to reveal a sky bruised with the promise of a new day. The fire had left devastation in its wake, But amid the rubble, a fragile hope stirred, one that I vowed to nurture with every breath and every verse. The weight of loss was immense, yet heavier still was the responsibility of memory. And so, I wrote on, my words a fragile shield against the darkness, a testament that even in ruin, the human spirit endures. The evening air was heavy with the scent of burning wood and wet stone, faint wisps of smoke curling through the cracked window panes of the chamber where Nerissa worked. Candlelight flickered against the rough-hewn walls, casting long shadows that danced like restless spirits. Her slender fingers trembled slightly as she held the reed pen, dipping it into the ink with careful precision. Each stroke was deliberate, each curve of a letter a small act of defiance against the relentless tide consuming their world. Beside her, the poet watched with a quiet intensity, his eyes, deep-set and shadowed from sleepless nights, softened as he observed the young apprentice's growing confidence. Steady, he murmured, voice laced with both encouragement and the weight of urgency. Remember, these words are more than ink on parchment. They are the flame that must not be allowed to die. Nerissa nodded, swallowing the lump that rose in her throat. The responsibility pressed upon her like a tangible weight, heavy yet strangely invigorating. The verses she copied were no mere poems. They were fragments of a world slipping inexorably into shadow. Each line carried the wisdom of scholars long gone, the dreams of a city built on knowledge, and the fragile hope that even as the flames devoured the physical, the essence could endure. Outside, the distant roar of the city's unrest seeped into the small room. The muffled clamor of hurried footsteps, the crackle of flames licking closer, and the low murmur of frightened voices provided a grim soundtrack to their work. Yet within this fragile sanctuary, time seemed to slow, focusing all energy on the delicate task before them. The world may forget the scrolls, the poet said softly, but it must not forget the words. Nerissa's gaze lifted from the script, meeting his. In her wide eyes flickered the mingling of fear and resolve. "I will remember," she whispered, the promise catching in her breath. As the hours waned, fatigue settled into her bones. The ink-stained parchment grew in neat piles beside her, each scroll a testament to perseverance. Yet, despite weariness, Nerissa's movements grew surer, her copying more fluid. The initial hesitation that had marked her first attempts melted into a steady rhythm, a quiet rebellion against the destruction raging beyond the walls. The poet leaned back, exhaustion pinching the lines of his face. "You have become more than an apprentice," he declared, voice thick with emotion. "You are the keeper now." A faint smile touched her lips, fragile but genuine. The mantle was heavy, yet it was a mantle she was ready to bear. In that moment, a fragile thread of hope wove itself through the encroaching darkness. The night deepened, and with it, the poet's verses found new life in Nerissa's careful hands. Outside, the city trembled under the weight of its fate, but within the chamber, a small flame of continuity burned bright. The promise of knowledge, of memory, and of resilience lived on not in the ash and ruin, but in the unyielding spirit of those who refused to let words perish. As Nerissa rolled the final scroll and tied it with a thread, her heart thrummed with a mixture of exhaustion and determination. The road ahead was uncertain, fraught with danger and loss, but the legacy they carried was a beacon in the gathering night. The poet stood, stretching cramped limbs, eyes fixed on the fragile bundle in Nerissa's hands. "Tomorrow," he said, voice steady despite the tremor beneath, "we must find a way to carry these safely beyond the flames." She nodded, understanding the gravity of what lay ahead. "I will not fail you." As the candle guttered low and shadows deepened, Nerissa's promise echoed silently through the chamber, a vow that the intellectual fire, though battered, would endure beyond the ruin. The poet's verses, once fragile whispers in the shadow of destruction, now found a steadfast guardian in the young scribe. The story of Alexandria's greatest library, though scarred by flame, was far from finished. And in that fragile vow lay the true heart of resistance, not in stone or scrolls, but in the unyielding will to remember and to hope. The night held its breath, waiting for the dawn, and with it, the next chapter in the story of survival. The acrid scent of smoke hung heavy in the air, mingling with the dust of crumbling stone and scattered parchment. The city of Alexandria, that ancient jewel of learning and culture, was now a labyrinth of ruin and despair. Yet amid this chaos, a quiet determination stirred in the narrow alleyways where the merchant moved with practiced stealth. His cart, modest and unassuming, was laden with the weight of centuries' scrolls, fragile and precious, each one a fragment of a vast mosaic of human thought. The merchant's hands were steady, though his eyes betrayed the tension that gripped him. Every creak of wood, every distant cry, was a reminder that time was slipping away with the smoke and flame. The poet watched him from the shadows near the ruined library steps, his heart pounding with a mixture of gratitude and sorrow. The merchant was a man of pragmatism, a stark contrast to the poet's idealism, yet both were bound by a common cause: to preserve what they could of a world unraveling before their eyes. "Are the scrolls secure?" the poet asked quietly as the merchant finished stowing the last bundle. For now the merchant replied, his voice low but firm. "But the road ahead is perilous. The city is no longer safe, and there are eyes everywhere, some looking to seize, others indifferent to the loss." Celine emerged from the shadows, her presence a reassuring anchor amid the tempest. Her sharp gaze swept the surroundings, vigilant as ever. "We must move swiftly," she urged. "The longer we linger, the greater the risk." Together, the trio set out, threading through the labyrinthine streets, where the destruction was most severe. Flames still licked at the edges of the library's outer walls, casting a flickering orange glow that danced against the night. The crackling roar was punctuated by the distant shouts of frightened citizens and the heavy footsteps of soldiers enforcing curfews. The merchant's intimate knowledge of Alexandria's back alleys and hidden paths was their greatest asset. He guided Celine and the poet on a circuitous route designed to avoid the main thoroughfares, where chaos and danger were at their peak. Each step was measured, every sound analyzed for threats. As they moved, the poet's mind raced. He thought of the countless scholars who had passed through these streets and halls, men and women who had dedicated their lives to the pursuit of knowledge. Now much of that knowledge was reduced to ash. Yet in his heart he clung to the belief that words, once spoken or written, bore a resilience beyond the physical. The merchant's cart jolted over uneven cobblestones, the precious cargo trembling with each bump. "Careful," Celine cautioned, her hand resting on the hilt of her sword, ready for any sudden peril. "We cannot afford to lose anything now." Hours passed like this, a tense dance between hope and despair. At one point, they paused beneath the shadow of a crumbling archway, catching their breath and listening intently. The night was filled with the symphony of destruction, the crackle of fire, the distant crash of falling masonry, the murmurs of frightened voices. "The city mourns," the poet whispered, "but it must not forget." The merchant nodded, wiping sweat from his brow despite the cool night air. "It is why I do this, not for glory, but for the future. These scrolls are more than paper and ink. They are the memory of a people, a testament to our shared humanity." Celine's eyes softened briefly, her usual resolve touched by the weight of their mission. "Then we must ensure they live beyond these walls." Finally, as dawn's first light began to pale the dark sky, they approached the city's edge. The air shifted, cooler and freer, carrying with it the faint scent of the sea. The merchant's breathing grew steadier, relief washing over his features as the gates loomed ahead, still standing, still guarding a fragile hope. Carefully, the cart slipped through the guards' watchful eyes, aided by Celine's authority and the merchant's quick thinking. Beyond the gates, the world seemed quieter, the devastation of the city momentarily held at bay. The poet stepped forward, touching the bundles wrapped in cloth, his fingers tracing the outlines of the scrolls within. "These words, these fragments of our past, they will endure," he said, voice firm with conviction. "Not just in memory, but in these scrolls, in the hearts of those who carry them forward. The merchant exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. For now they are safe, but the journey is far from over. Celine sheathed her sword, her gaze distant but resolute. Then we must prepare for what comes next. The survival of knowledge depends on more than just escape. It requires guardianship and sacrifice. As the first rays of sunlight painted the horizon, the three stood united, bearers of a flame that, though battered and bruised, refused to be extinguished. The city behind them smoldered, but the future held a fragile promise. The merchant's flight was more than a simple act of survival. It was a defiant stand against oblivion, a vital link in the chain that would carry Alexandria's legacy beyond the ashes. And as the poet prepared to continue his verses in exile, he knew that both tangible and intangible treasures must endure for the hope of rebirth. Yet, amid the fragile calm, a question lingered in the poet's mind like a whispered echo. How long could words and scrolls withstand the tides of time and turmoil? The answer, he hoped, lay not in certainty but in relentless faith. I sat in the shadowed alcove of the library's western wing, the air thick with the scent of smoke and the bitter tang of ash. Around me, the once proud shelves stood scarred and empty, their treasures either lost to flame or hastily concealed. My quill hovered above the fragile parchment, fingers trembling not from cold but from a weariness that burrowed deep within my bones. The weight of loss pressed upon me. The knowledge of countless minds, the dreams of centuries, seemed to flicker like a dying candle before the inexorable darkness. The fire had come and gone, leaving behind ruin and silence where once there was the vibrant hum of discovery. I had borne witness to the collapse, each crackle of burning papyrus a nail in the coffin of our collective intellect. Yet, as the smoke cleared, I found myself confronted not only with the external devastation, but with the tempest within. Doubt gnawed at my resolve. Could words, mere symbols on parchment, truly outlast the ravages of flame and time? Was my labor a futile act of defiance against the inevitable? I lowered my quill, rubbing my weary eyes beneath lids swollen from sleepless nights. The brittle parchment before me seemed to mock my hesitation, its surface fragile as the memories it sought to preserve. Somewhere deep inside, a voice whispered that to despair was to surrender, that the essence of thought, once set free by the ink, might yet transcend the physicality of its vessel. It was then that a quiet presence entered the alcove. Celine, her footsteps, steady and sure despite the ruin around us, brought with them an unspoken promise of endurance. She approached with measured grace, her dark eyes meeting mine with a familiarity born of shared struggle. Placing a firm hand upon my shoulder, she offered a smile rare and brief but luminous against the gloom. "We endure," she said simply, voice low but resolute. "Words are more than ink and scrolls. They are the fire that no flame can consume." Her conviction rekindled a spark within me. I felt the weight upon my shoulders shift, no longer a crushing burden, but a mantle of responsibility I was determined to bear. The fragility of my body mattered less than the strength of my spirit, and with renewed purpose, I dipped my quill once more into the ink. Hours later, Nerissa appeared, clutching a freshly copied scroll. Her fingers were stained with ink, and her youthful face bore traces of fatigue, yet her eyes shone with a fierce determination that belied her years. She unrolled the parchment carefully and began to read aloud. Her voice, at first tentative, grew steadier with each line, weaving the poet's verses into the heavy air, a fragile melody of memory and hope amidst the desolation. I listened, heart swelling with a bittersweet pride. Here was the future, embodied in a young apprentice who embraced the daunting task of preservation. The words were not merely surviving. They were living, breathing, carrying with them the indomitable will of those who refused to let the light of knowledge be extinguished. As Nerissa's voice faded, I rose and moved toward a shattered window overlooking the city's smoldering skyline. The horizon was a tapestry of smoke and embers, a testament to human folly and loss. Yet beneath the ruin, I sensed a pulse, a stubborn heartbeat of resilience. I inhaled deeply, the acrid air filling my lungs, and vowed silently that as long as breath remained within me, I would be the keeper of this flame. The physical library might have fallen, but the intellectual fire it kindled would burn eternal, carried forth on the wings of words and memory. Tonight, I am no longer merely a witness to destruction. I am a guardian of legacy, a poet who stands defiantly against oblivion. And in this resolve, I find my strength renewed, ready to face whatever trials the dawn may bring. The quill moved steadily across the parchment, each stroke a defiant heartbeat against the silent void. In the depths of despair, I found a wellspring of hope, and with it, the promise that knowledge, like fire, can never be fully tamed or truly lost. But the night is long, and the shadows deepen. Yet even as darkness gathers, my verses will blaze onward, a testament to all that was, and all that might yet be. I must write, I must endure, for in words we live beyond the flame. The night had folded around Alexandria like a shroud, but its darkness was pierced by a terrible light. From my vantage on the balcony above the central courtyard, I watched the great library surrender itself to the flames. The fire was not merely a blaze. It was a ravenous creature, consuming all with an insatiable hunger that defied reason. Walls, scrolls, and dreams all succumbed beneath its relentless advance. The roar of the inferno filled the air, a chorus of destruction that drowned out the cries of men, and the whispered laments of knowledge slipping beyond reach. Beneath the fiery canopy, the shadows danced with cruel whimsy. The flames licked at the sky as though to claim the heavens themselves, their tongues flickering with mocking grace. I felt a peculiar awe amid the despair, how the very thing that destroyed could also purify, how fire's dual nature was as ancient as time. It reminded me of the hobris that had built this city, and its great repository of wisdom, a human ambition reaching too far, daring to capture the sum of all knowledge in fragile scrolls and brittle tomes. Yet, as the fire consumed, it also unveiled a truth nothing mortal could endure untouched. Inside the inner sanctum, the air was thick with smoke and the acrid scent of burning parchment. Callimachus and I moved quickly, our hands trembling as we gathered what fragile scrolls we could reach. The ember-strewn air stung our eyes and choked our breaths, but still we dared to hope. Each scroll we saved felt like a small victory, a whispered defiance against the inferno's claim. Callimachus's eyes, sharp behind his round spectacles, mirrored my own sorrow and determination. Together, we were guardians of a legacy that now seemed as fragile as the ash swirling around us. Outside, Celine's presence was a blistering flame of its own. As the city's guard, she stood between the chaos and the dwindling remnants of knowledge. A desperate mob surged toward the library's gates, hands grasping for any remnant of the scrolls and tomes now beyond their reach. Celine met them with fierce resolve, her athletic form illuminated by the fiery glow, eyes blazing with unyielding spirit. Her voice rang out, both command and plea, a shield forged not just of steel but of unbreakable will. In her, I saw the embodiment of the city's struggle, a delicate balance of destruction and defense. Retreating to a hidden alcove, I found solace in the quiet hum of a single candle. The pale light flickered against the walls, shadows stretched and shrank like living things, mirroring the chaos beyond. Here, I wrote with fevered urgency, my fingers stained with ink and trembling from exhaustion. Each verse was a battle cry, a tether to a future unseen but fiercely hoped for. I wrestled with the paradox that gnawed at my heart. The physical knowledge, the scrolls and tomes, would perish in the flames, yet perhaps the essence, the ideas, the words could rise anew, immortal in memory and ink. The fire's hunger was total, its destruction absolute, but I clung to the fragile hope that the written word might transcend the blaze. The flames could devour parchment and wood, but they could not consume the spirit that crafted the verses, nor the human will to remember and pass on what had been lost. In the heart of destruction, I found a stubborn ember of resilience, a promise that even as the great library crumbled to ash, The intellectual fire it kindled would endure, carried in the verses I now penned with trembling hands. The night stretched on, a battleground between flame and memory, between loss and hope. As the fire painted the sky with strokes of orange and black, I whispered a vow to the dying light that I would be the keeper of this last intellectual flame, that words would outlive the fire, and that from the ashes some fragment of our collective wisdom would rise again. The flames may hunger to erase, but they would never silence the eternal fire of human thought. And as the first embers fell like tears into the dark streets below, I felt the weight of human hubris and the fragile promise of resilience entwined, a testament to the enduring power of words in a world consumed by flame. The night was far from over, and the story of fire and memory was yet to be fully told.